Most men believe they can figure a woman out almost immediately just by observing a few behaviors. They watch how she talks, how she reacts, how she carries herself, and they assume those signs tell a complete story about who she is. From there, they begin forming conclusions without realizing how little they actually understand. It feels logical in the moment, like everything is adding up, but what's really happening is interpretation without depth. The truth is, most of those conclusions are not just slightly off, they are completely inaccurate. And the problem is, you don't notice it while it's happening. Your mind connects patterns quickly, and once you feel certain about what you're seeing, you stop questioning it. You believe you've already figured things out. But behavior on its own doesn't explain anything fully. It only shows a surface reaction, not the reason behind it. Two different women can behave in the exact same way for completely different reasons. Without context, you're not understanding, you're guessing. This is where most men get caught without realizing it. They observe a behavior once or twice, assign meaning to it, and then move forward as if that meaning is accurate. They don't pause to question it or look deeper. Instead, they lock in that belief and let it guide how they respond. From that point on, every action they take is influenced by something that may not even be true. What makes this more dangerous is how quickly those assumptions shape behavior. You might start pulling back when there's no real reason to. You might become overly cautious, or on the other side, you might chase harder thinking you've understood something important. All of these reactions come from a belief that hasn't been tested, and once you start acting on it, you create outcomes based on misunderstanding, not reality. Behavior without context can be very misleading. The same reaction can come from confidence, comfort, personality, or even past experience. From the outside, it looks identical, but the reason behind it is completely different. If you don't take time to understand that, you'll keep making decisions based on surface-level signals, and that's where most mistakes begin. This is exactly why misunderstanding behavior doesn't just create confusion, it actually costs you opportunities. When you misread what's happening, you respond in ways that don't match the situation. You might step back when you should lean in, or push forward when you should stay calm. And because you believe your interpretation is correct, you don't realize that your reaction is what's creating the problem. Over time, this pattern becomes consistent. You start to notice things not working out, but you can't clearly identify why. You think it's bad luck, or timing, or something about the other person. But in many cases, it comes down to how you interpreted things in the beginning. One wrong assumption leads to another, and before you know it, the entire interaction is built on something that was never accurate in the first place. This is why awareness matters. When you begin to question your assumptions instead of trusting them immediately, everything starts to shift. You slow down, observe more carefully, and respond with more clarity. And that alone changes how situations develop, because now you're reacting to reality, not your own interpretation. One of the biggest mistakes men make is believing they can understand a woman's past just by looking at how she behaves in the present. They see confidence, openness, or a certain level of comfort, and they immediately attach a story to it. In their mind, those behaviors must come from a specific kind of experience. But that assumption is built on a false idea, the belief that behavior always reflects history in a direct and obvious way. The reality is far more complex. Behavior is influenced by many factors at the same time. Personality plays a role, environment matters, mood shifts things, and how she feels in that exact moment can change everything. It is not one simple cause leading to one simple outcome. But most men simplify it anyway. They take one visible sign, assign a fixed meaning to it, and stop observing anything beyond that point. Once that meaning is locked in, it becomes the lens through which they see everything else. Instead of learning more, they start reacting based on what they think they already know. And that's where the disconnect begins. Once that idea is fixed in your mind, you stop seeing the person in front of you clearly. Instead of responding to what's actually happening, you begin reacting to the story you created. Every new behavior gets filtered through that assumption, and over time, it feels like your interpretation is being confirmed, even when it's not. That's how misjudgment becomes reinforced. This is where many men make costly mistakes without realizing it. You might distance yourself too early, thinking you've understood something important. You might judge her unfairly or treat her in a way that doesn't match who she really is. In some cases, you might even lose interest based on something that was never true in the first place. And the worst part is, you feel justified in your actions because your belief feels real. Another layer to this problem is where these assumptions come from. A lot of them are picked up from outside influences, things you hear online, opinions from other people, simplified advice that turns complex behavior into quick labels. It sounds convincing, but it lacks depth. Real human behavior is not that simple. It cannot be reduced to one sign or one meaning. Real behavior is layered, and that's what most men overlook. Two women can act the same way on the surface and still be driven by completely different reasons underneath. One might be acting from confidence, another from comfort, another from habit, and another from how she feels about you in that moment. But if you only look at the surface, you miss all of that. You treat every situation as if it follows the same rule, and that's where the misinterpretation begins. When you don't understand this, you start making decisions too quickly. You assume you've figured things out, so you stop paying attention. You stop observing changes, patterns, and subtle differences. Instead, you react based on a single moment. And when that moment doesn't represent the full picture, your response becomes misaligned with reality. This is why you have to slow down your thinking. Instead of trying to define what something means immediately, give yourself time to observe more. Let patterns form. Let behavior repeat itself in different situations. Because one moment doesn't tell you the truth, it only gives you a glimpse. And if you treat that glimpse as the full story, you will keep getting it wrong. One of the most common misinterpretations happens when men try to link a woman's response to something about her past. If she doesn't react the way you expected, or if she seems less engaged in a certain moment, the assumption quickly becomes that it must be connected to something deeper about her history. But this is where things start going in the wrong direction, because you're trying to explain a present moment using an idea that may not even apply. A person's response is influenced by many things happening at once: comfort level, emotional connection, timing, communication, and even mood can all affect how someone reacts. It is not always a reflection of experience or anything long-term. So when you reduce it to one explanation, you miss what's actually happening in that moment, and that prevents you from adjusting correctly. What most men don't realize is that someone can be interested, attracted, and still not fully expressive right away. That doesn't mean something is wrong. It might just mean the connection hasn't developed enough yet. When you understand that, you stop jumping to conclusions and start paying attention to what actually matters. Another mistake that shows up often is assuming that a woman's confidence automatically points to a specific kind of background. If she speaks clearly, knows what she wants, or expresses herself without hesitation, many men immediately attach meaning to it. They start thinking that confidence must come from certain experiences, and from there, they begin forming judgments that may not reflect reality at all. Confidence can come from many different places. For some, it's natural personality. For others, it comes from how they were raised or how they've learned to understand themselves. It can also come from emotional awareness, knowing how to communicate and express thoughts without fear. None of these automatically connect to any specific past situation, but when you assume they do, you create a narrative that wasn't there to begin with. The deeper issue is how that assumption affects your behavior. Once you believe something about her that isn't grounded in reality, you start responding differently. You may question her more, hold back unnecessarily, or treat her with doubt instead of clarity. And that shift changes the entire interaction, not because of who she is, but because of how you chose to interpret her. Another place where men misread situations is when money or attention becomes part of the interaction. If she expects you to spend, asks for certain things, or shows more interest when resources are involved, it's easy to jump to conclusions. Many men immediately label it and assume it defines her character completely. But that kind of reaction often comes too fast and lacks understanding of the bigger picture. People relate to money in different ways. Some see it as a normal part of dating culture, some are influenced by how they were raised, and others are simply used to a certain lifestyle. That doesn't automatically tell you everything about their intentions. When you react based on a single moment, you either overinvest trying to meet expectations, or you pull back too quickly based on assumptions. Both responses come from misreading the situation. What matters more is consistency. How does she behave when there's nothing to gain? Does her energy stay the same, or does it change depending on what's being offered? Patterns reveal truth, not isolated actions. When you focus on patterns, you stop guessing and start understanding what's actually real. At this point, the real shift you need to make is in what you choose to focus on. Instead of trying to decode every small behavior, you need to pay attention to patterns that repeat over time. One moment doesn't define anything. One reaction doesn't tell you the truth. But consistent behavior across different situations will always reveal what's real. That's where clarity comes from. Look at how she treats you over time. Is her interest steady, or does it disappear without reason? Does she show effort even when there's nothing to gain? Does she respect your time, your boundaries, and the interaction itself? These are the things that actually matter, because they show intention, not just reaction. You also need to understand your role in this. Ego, fear, and insecurity often push men to make quick assumptions because they want certainty. But that false certainty leads to wrong decisions. When you slow down, observe more, and question your initial thoughts, everything changes. You stop reacting emotionally and start responding with awareness. And once you reach that point, you no longer guess what's happening. You see it clearly, and that gives you control over how you move forward.